Hello everyone, it's Chrissy here from the Dunkin Ducks, and I am here to tell you all about how to winterize your coop for your pet ducks. Now unfortunately this year my coop is not yet done being built yet, so I can't show you everything in action, but I can tell you exactly what you need to do in order to keep your flock safe and warm this winter. Munchkin and I just have one small favor to ask you. If you could like this video, subscribe, and comment down below what you want to learn about pet ducks next. I would really appreciate it, and it really helps me with taking care of the ducks. Now without further ado, let's get started. One of the most important things, of course, with winterizing a coop is what bedding should you be using. Now, in the summer and the spring, and of course the fall too, I can use pine shavings, but in the winter I need to use something that's a bit better at insulating their coop. So personally, I like to use straw. Now, there is a big debate on whether to use straw versus hay, but I can tell you why I believe straw is the best option. So straw does not mold as easily as hay. If you put hay in a duck pen and it's going to get wet, because ducks are waterfowl, they're super messy and they do tend to get pretty much everything wet. You are going to end up with moldy hay that your ducks are going to be breathing in, and that's of course never good. Straw is also a much better insulator than hay, and if we're trying to keep our ducks warm, we're definitely going to want to use the best insulator possible. Now personally, I like to use at least 3 inches of bedding to make sure that their feet are nice and warm, and I also like to add full straw bales into the coop. That way they have an option of getting even higher up off of the ground. From my experience, about 50% of my ducks will sleep on the hay bales, while the other 50% will just sleep on the bedding on the ground. So that choice is yours, but personally I really think it's definitely good, and the hay bales make even better insulation along the sides of your coop. Number 2 is heat lamps, and heat lamps are something that a lot of people use, but I personally will not ever recommend using. Unfortunately, every single year I see posts on the duck groups that I'm in Facebook that people's entire coops with all of their birds inside of them burn down due to using heat lamps. And the reason for this is heat lamps are designed to really heat things up, and by taking something that is extremely flammable and putting it in a small enclosed space filled with flammable materials like your bedding and even your duck's feathers, that's not really a good idea. Now, a lot of people, of course, use heat lamps because they're worried about their ducks getting cold in the winter, but I can promise you, your ducks are absolutely fine on their own as long as you allow them to acclimate to the temperature. Ducks have their own built-in down jackets, and if you've ever worn a down jacket, which I haven't, but from what I've read, they don't really keep you warm, they keep you hot. So that's essentially what your duck's feathers are doing. They are keeping them nice and toasty, and they do not need a heat lamp. Ducks actually do very well down to -20 degrees, according to a lot of research, and I've also seen people that keep ducks in temperatures down to -40, and their ducks are absolutely fine. People keep ducks in Alaska, so regardless of where you live, please don't use a heat lamp. It's seriously way more dangerous than it is worth it, and your ducks are fine without it. Another important thing to note with heat lamps is that if your power ever happened to go out and there is more than a 20-degree difference between the inside of the coop and the outside temperature, your ducks are essentially going from super warm to super cold very fast, and that can actually cause hypothermia, which of course can cause major complications with your ducks and even death. So please don't buy a heat lamp. Tip number 3 is about frozen ponds. So of course, if you have a small pond, it is going to freeze, but ducks do need access to water all year long. So obviously the best option is to have a huge natural pond that isn't going to freeze in the winter, but of course we don't all have that option. So some studies have actually shown that the less water access your ducks have, the more likely they are to be affected by the cold. And that's because if your ducks don't have access to water that they can swim in, they are more likely to get an illness called wet feather. And wet feather essentially means that when they do get wet, they are getting wet. Whereas normally ducks don't actually get wet because of the oils on their feathers, the water just slides right off. But when ducks have wet feather, they are actually getting saturated in water. So a duck with wet feather is not only wet, but then they become cold because their feathers are no longer protecting them from the harsh winters. Ducks with wet feather can actually freeze to death in temperatures up to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is above freezing, but still super cold. If you're saturated in water and you're out in this cold weather, it's just not a good mix. So please make sure your ducks have access to some type of water. Of course, a huge pond is the best, but do what you can. is what I'm going to say. Now there's a few different options for how you can keep your pond not frozen. You can of course dump out the water every day and fill it back up, or if you have a natural pond, that's wonderful. Hopefully it doesn't freeze. You can use aerators, bubblers, heat de-icer things. But it really depends on the type of pond you have, whether that's like a kiddie pool or a natural pond. So I will encourage you to do your own research as far as that goes, because I don't want to get too far into detail with that. And number 4 is wind. So your ducks really don't mind the cold itself. As I said earlier, they are designed to keep themselves warm in the winter. They have a thick layer of fat as well as all of these awesome down feathers that keep them warm, but they are bothered by the wind. So it's super important to make sure your ducks have access to shelter, especially in the winter when that wind is whipping through and super cold. So one of the reasons that ducks don't do very well in wind is because wind essentially is opening their feather barrier. So if the wind comes by from this way, it will make her feathers lift up. And that is going to release all of the humidity that is stored in between their feathers that is actually keeping them warm and working as insulation. So it's super important for your ducks to not be in the wind. And what I typically do is in their pen, I will set up tarps around all of the sides to keep the wind from coming in. And of course, in their coop, it is fully enclosed minus the vents. 5 is going to be ventilation. So even in the winter, ventilating your coop is super important. So what I like to do is keep the vents at the top of the coop open, because that way the wind is not drafting right through the ducks and actually touching their feathers, but it does allow for the humidity inside of the coop to escape. And the reason we want the humidity in the coop to escape is because, as we all know as duck owners, ducks tend to make everything super wet, but we don't want ice in the coop because ice can lead to frostbite very quickly. So of course your ducks need access to water, and you're going to be giving them bowls of water, and that is creating a ton of humidity, especially the heated water bowls. Now of course we do need heated water bowls, but they're releasing a ton of humidity into your enclosed duck coop, and that's not so great when it doesn't have anywhere to escape. So keep the vents on the top open, but any vents on the bottom of your coop, you can close those up to prevent a draft from running across your duck's feathers. And number 6, we are going to talk about frostbite. So frostbite is actually most common in Muscovy ducks. Now, if you remember from some of my TikTok videos, you know that Muscovy ducks aren't actually the same species as ducks, although they are very similar. They're simply a South American species of waterfowl. Now, one of the differences between Muscovies and ducks is that when ducks sleep, they tuck their feet up into their feathers, which is a great way of preventing frostbite, but Muscovy ducks can't do that. So if you do happen to notice that you see more things online about Muscovy ducks getting frostbite than any other ducks, that's your reason why. Now, how do we prevent frostbite? So typically the best course of action to prevent frostbite is, of course, keeping your ducks warm and on straw bedding. But when things get really cold, they're going to need an extra layer of protection. So just like us humans, when our lips get super chapped in the winter and we apply chapstick, we're essentially going to be doing the same thing with our ducks, except we're going to be using Vaseline or bag balm. And you can apply that to their bill, their legs, and their feet to help prevent frostbite in all 3 areas. Number 7 is heated water buckets. Now, if you live somewhere where it gets below freezing, you are of course going to need a heated water bucket. You can get these from most local farm stores. I'm pretty sure they're on Amazon as well. There are lots of different kinds of heated water buckets. Personally, I like to use the heated dog bowls that they sell at Tractor Supply, because those allow for my ducks to be able to dunk their entire head in the bowl, which is how they prefer it, and that also allows them to clear out their nares and their throat with water. Chicken water bucket doesn't actually work very well for ducks because they can't clear their nares, and that's super essential for them in order to keep them healthy. Now, if you don't have access to electricity inside of your coop and it is below freezing, you're just going to have to change out that water more often as it freezes, and for that I would recommend using rubber tubs. They also sell these in the bin section at feed stores, and the reason I recommend rubber is because rubber isn't going to break when you smash the ice out of it, whereas a plastic tub or a glass tub absolutely would. So go for the rubber on that one. Yes, your ducks are going to eat snow, and that of course is giving them water, but it's not enough, and that doesn't allow them to clear out their sinuses or their nares, so it's still important to make sure that they have water. Now, I just want to reiterate temperature for number 8. Ducks are absolutely fine down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit as long as they can get out of the wind. So whether that be tarps up around your pen, or they have access to their coop or another shelter inside of their pen, it's super important to just make sure that they can get out of the wind. And finally, I just want to bust some myths about migration. So a lot of people believe that the only reason ducks migrate is because it is cold, and that's why they put heat lamps in their coop, because they believe that their babies are getting cold. But I'm here to bust that myth. Cold weather is not the only reason that ducks migrate. Ducks migrate because when... Oh, nice, you didn't on me. Good girl. Ducks migrate because they don't have access to food in the winter, so as long as you are providing them plenty of food, they are perfectly fine. Now, some quick tips for keeping your water from freezing before it gets super cold out. A ping pong ball in their water bucket or a frozen water bottle filled with salt water can actually help prevent freezing. Of course, that is not going to work when it is super cold out, but for the time being, like right now, we just have like frost in the morning and sometimes there's just a thin layer of ice on our ponds that can actually help prevent that. And our final tip is when it is winter, you may want to make your ducks just a little bit fatter so they have an extra layer of fat to keep them warm. And most people do this by feeding their ducks scratch grains or corn. I just want to make sure I'm recommending whole corn instead of scratch corn? What is it called? Whole corn kernels are actually a lot better at keeping your ducks warm in the winter than cracked corn. Whole corn is actually a lot better at keeping your ducks warm in the winter rather than cracked corn because it takes them a lot more energy to digest, which is creating the warmth. So opt for whole corn if you want. That is all for my winter tips and tricks as far as keeping pet ducks. But if you could do me a favor and click that notification bell, subscribe, and leave a comment below about what you want me to make a video about next as far as how to raise pet ducks. And one final thing, I just wanted to let you all know that I have officially opened a Patreon where I am posting exclusive duck pictures, tips for raising pet ducks, and we're just having a great time. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I will have the link in the description of this video, and I hope you all have a quacktastic day.